let's now get into the Dave Castro interview that we did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was this past Saturday.
Yes.
And there's some things I want to address because I went back and listened to it again. I was like, oh man, I should have done this, or I should have said that, or maybe I should have gone here on that one. And I was pretty shocked at the diverse reaction we got from it. We got some people who were saying, this is great. Dave is fantastic. Thank you so much for posting this. We got some like, this guy's this and that, and called us clowns and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was all over the board.
Yeah, and probably rightfully so. I think it's the obviously it's not like we were perfect in that interview, and it's not like Dave was perfect, and it's not like everything in that interview was bad too. So I mean, I was a little surprised at the mix. Obviously, when we left there, I was like feeling pretty good about the interview. I felt like we pushed a little bit, but for the most part, and I think this is important because I want to provide some context. The purpose of the interview was to provide a platform for Dave to speak his mind and his opinion, given his kind of general general avoidance of public statements and the recent silence over everything that's taken place. And I didn't really, at least personally, and I know we kind of chatted a little bit, we didn't really want to overly interject our own opinion into it, per se. That's not to say we couldn't have done things way better, and we certainly could. And also the other contextual piece is we had some conversations before and after that were offline that I think paint a better and more fuller picture of where Dave stands based on some of the feedback and criticisms of the things he said, as well as the full truth of where he stands and what's going on with him, at least on a personal level. So that being said, we can dive into it. I just wanted to provide a few of those things so people have an understanding of the things that we've seen, what we've heard, where we are, and what kind of our stated goal was.
Yeah, and the first thing I had on my list, and we can go wherever, but the first thing I had was just taking a look at the culture issue. And what I mean by that is specifically the culture at CrossFit HQ. Because you and I have talked about this before, and we did it on a Q&A episode after the Andy Stump thing happened. And maybe some people didn't catch that.
Sure.
You and I were very far removed from Greg's inner circle, very far removed. And if you go back and you listen to the Cleared Hot episode that Andy Stump did, the key thing that he says is the closer you got to the apex of the company, the more you saw. So you and I were very far removed from that. And I think there's this perception out there that everything that, Greg was accused of doing, or everything that, that stuff that's out there, that was going on in the office as well. Now, I never saw anything close to what Greg was accused of doing happen around me. That's not to say I didn't see things that I was like, that's, we might not want to do that, or that's a little unprofessional.
Or I personally wouldn't do that,
Exactly. Yeah. Stuff like that. But it was not, people who kind of think that it was just a den of inequity over there, and it was just, that's not the case. There were some things that definitely needed to be addressed, but it was nothing close to what is what allegedly has gone on in Greg's circle.
Sure, I agree. And one of the things I wanted to address that fits in line with this is some of the criticisms were kind of broadly painting, HQ with the same, everybody at HQ with the same brush. Now, granted, I don't disagree with the idea that some of the culture of a company begins at the top. However, there were some structures put in place, I believe, specifically by our old media director that basically started that office in order to protect us from those things.
Right.
I remember him at one point being like, "Oh man, you don't know what I shield you guys from." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" And he would never tell us. And I think that was purposeful, obviously. And I would, for the most part, I would to an extent defend the culture that was in our office per se. That's not to say there wasn't improvements and things that a lot of people some people might be like, well, I'm not a fan of that. And that's fair. That's totally fair. I'm happy to own up for those things. But I see these people kind of saying like, my faith in all of HQ has never been lower. All of HQ doesn't care for us. And I think that while the criticism of what HQ could be doing better and how they need to improve is fair, I don't think on a personal level, it's fair to cast all of those individuals in the light. When you talk about, I hope that when people, I think they're assuming that everything that Greg did trickled down all the way top to bottom. And that's just not true. And I hope that when they understand some of those criticisms, when they talk about HQ, they talk about everybody at HQ and have enough nuance in the discussion and the discourse to be able to distinguish the barriers and the differences between people and their behaviors that exist. So, when you're painting everybody in the same brush as Greg, realize that you're painting people like, and I'm going to name them, and I'm out of respect, Jonathan Haynes,
Mhm.
Chuck Carswell, Eric Preston. You can even say, some of the former seminar staff members, people like Chris Smith, Jennifer Hunter Marshall, members of the Black community that have been a part or been of HQ and the endeavors for a long time. That had nothing to do with what Greg was going on. It
Mhm.
had literally had nothing to do. So to paint those people in the same light, I don't think is fair. I'm willing to take responsibility for whatever we have to own up to. And I think Greg and I think Dave and I think anyone that was potentially involved has to own up and face, pay the piper.
Mhm.
Or I keep wanting to say there's that movie, the Chris Farley movie. We keep saying pay to the fiddler, and it's not right. But yeah, I think people, they deserve to be held accountable. Dave is included in that. But I think there's more nuance to how these things, this organization was. And I've actively been in the comment section trying to distinguish that. That's not saying I'm deflecting blame. No, we're responsible. And I don't think Dave was blaming us. But we got that quite a bit. People saying that Dave was deflecting blame onto us for the culture. I think that's where Dave was very poor in articulating his point. He was more saying that we are responsible for the office culture, meaning that we had control. We were not subject to the culture that Greg was putting down in his inner circle, and that we had the freedom and responsibility to be able to create our own environment, which we did. That's not placing blame, although it may have sounded like. I've listened back to it, and it definitely I can see how people would say that. But he was more making the point of, like, as we have said before, there were these silos, and within these silos, we had the opportunity to create stuff for ourselves, and we had the opportunity to create an office culture. And there were some trickle down, and there were some bleed overs anytime those people came into town. But I don't think Dave was particularly placing blame on us, and I think that was a little bit of a misnomer as well.
Yeah, so that's where that whole section is where I think once I went back and listened to it again, it's like, oh man, this is, and I had some conversations with some other people, is where I realized this is what I should have said. This is where I should have gone. And I was hoping that Dave would, at very least, acknowledge that there were some problems that needed to be addressed.
Yeah.
And, I think you and I tried to get him there with our questions. And then, the whole thing that you just talked about, him pointing, literally pointed his finger at us and said that, it was our responsibility, and that he really refused to take any responsibility. And I agree with you. I don't think that was really the point that he was trying to make.
Yeah.
But I can see why it came off that way. Now, I never saw Dave treat anybody in a way that I would deem demeaning or inappropriate. I never saw him do that. I did, however, see him do some things I was like, yeah, I probably
wouldn't do it that way.
And that has to do with, like swearing in meetings. Let's think back to, I think it was 2013 or 14 when we were on ESPN3 and he drops an F-bomb during an interview. You're like, I wouldn't have done that. I think that's inappropriate. Yeah. That's Dave, though. That's what he does. But again,
that's not to excuse it either, right?
No, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's why, that's just, like you said, it's part of who he is, and it's something I wouldn't do. But what I was hoping is that he would at least acknowledge that culture starts at the top. And yes, Greg was not in there very much, but when he was, and when he rolled through there with his entourage, they conducted themselves in a certain way, and people take notice of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that his behavior and the way that, he spoke and the way that he addressed the group and the language he used and the attitude that he put forth may have given people a little more of a green light to push the envelope and do some things that I would consider that unprofessional. Now, again,
sure,
nothing that I saw ever amounted to what Greg is accused of doing.
Yeah.
I just want to make that very clear.
Yeah.
But there was language that was used. There was some,
some attitudes.
Yeah, right. There was some things that, that I could see why it would make some people uncomfortable.
And he has to own up to that.
Right. And I was a little disappointed that Dave, as a leader, And maybe Dave doesn't see himself as a leader in that office, and that could be it too. But I was a little disappointed that he didn't at least say, now as a CEO, it's like, yes, I'm aware of it. I want to make a change. This is what we're going to do, X, Y, and Z. Just at least acknowledge it.
Yeah,
And I was a
I
little
agree.
disappointed that he didn't. And I should have. That's where I should have pushed back, and I didn't. And I was trying to think how to do it, because I was just trying to get him to a place where he would say, yeah, there's some things that we need to tighten up and that we need to make better. And
Yeah.
I couldn't get him there.
Yeah, and it was tough. And I'll admit too, part of the shortcomings is like during that interview, I was worried that, and Dave has shown a little bit of this behavior in the past. That sometimes if you press a little too much, he'll
Mhm.
just, and he even admitted he doesn't share
Right.
much. He'll shut down and close people off. And I was a little bit worried of that. And we should have done more in that regard. And I think people were rightfully disappointed that he didn't address those directly
Mhm.
as the CEO and the leader. And I think that touches to a few other things that we'll dive into in a sec, but also that like there's some, Dave is not above reproach, and he needs to know that. And I think he does to some extent, but I think how he portrays himself at times can give off a different impression. I think it's important to talk to people to have an understanding of how he's viewed internally by the people that he has chosen to lead, specifically the training department, the
Mhm.
games department, and stuff like that. Um, I think it's telling that a lot of people haven't come out and spoke in that area, haven't spoken out against him
Mhm.
in terms of his capabilities. So I think that's where I would encourage people to be a little bit more open minded at that. And that's not saying there are some things that he still needs to improve on. Specifically, I think the view where he mentioned specifically the noise and negativity of the blowback, I disagreed with that pretty heavily, and I didn't process it at the time. It was in the beginning of the interview, and honestly, I completely forgot he said it. So when people started popping up with that kind of thing, I was like, wait a second.
Mhm.
I didn't even really catch that, and that's my fault, you know. And I think part of that was maybe colored by the conversation that we had before
Sure.
and after. Um, because I think to paint some of the valid criticisms and the valid issues as noise and negativity is just disingenuous, and it's an unwillingness to see the whole picture
Mhm.
and accept criticism. Um, and that puts people in a difficult spot in terms of trying to rationale why someone who's viewed as the leader of the company now as the CEO, especially when he's lamenting that people aren't celebrating a Mexican American man as CEO, and he's upset that people aren't celebrating the good things that they're doing. Um, it's hard for you to balance that when you brush off or poorly articulate some valid criticisms as noise and negativity. And I just think that did a disservice to a lot of the work of the um, the pushback that
Mhm.
has come on the company and Greg's actions from all areas, whether that's internally with staff and trainers, athletes, affiliates, people in the community. I think, and I did a little bit. I mentioned I had the free market comment, right? Like
Yeah.
people have a right to
Mhm.
voice their concerns and voice their issues, and I didn't like the way he phrased that. I don't think in his heart of hearts that he views all of the criticisms as just noise and negativity, because I, in our discussions with him offline, he shared some concerns
Mhm.
and some issues that mirrored those people's concerns and issues. However, um, I don't know if I don't know if he recognizes that. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a shortcoming of acknowledgement, and some of the things that he's doing behind the scenes that point to, well, if you're doing this, by virtue of you doing this, it kind of acknowledges that there's a problem in order to require doing that, such as the scholarship program, stuff
Mhm.
like that. So it was a little bit difficult to kind of, I guess, balance in the moment. Um, yeah.
Well, that to me is a good segue into something I wanted to talk about, and that was how he addressed cancel culture. And
mm,
I think that's kind of the point that he was getting at during that whole thing. And a lot of people said that he painted Greg as a victim, and I think he did sort of go in merger into that territory a little bit.
yeah. I don't think he views Greg as a victim,
No,
by the
I
way.
don't either, and I don't think that you know I am. I've said in
He's
private
not a victim.
conversation with you. No, he's
I'll say
not.
this: he's not a
Not a
victim,
victim.
not even in the ballpark.
No. That cancel culture concerns me. I think it goes a little too far at times. It does.
Mhm.
Some of the things going on concern me. But I don't think what happened to Greg was cancel culture whatsoever. For me, cancel culture is when someone who is in any other light, for the most part, a good person, who makes a mistake, says something offensive or tone deaf, or acts in an inappropriate way, something out of character.
Yeah.
And how one thing happens, and then here comes the cancel culture and totally tries to destroy that
The
person
mob
for one
destroys
mistake.
him. Yeah.
But
With no path to redemption.
right, and I think though, but this was a pattern of behavior.
Mhm.
It was going this way even before the tweet came out. It was going this way after the changes were made in 2018. There was a slow trickle. You and I talked to affiliate owners who were saying, "Oh man, I don't know if I want to be part of this anymore. I don't know the direction the company's going. We're
Yeah.
not getting any sort of direction from HQ.
Yeah.
I don't know what Greg's goals are. I don't know. I like the health message, but I don't agree with what's being done. All that kind of stuff. People were starting to slowly jump off the ship. Then you had the letter to Rocket CrossFit, which was totally inappropriate for a tone for a CEO to take.
Absurd.
Upset a lot of people, and rightfully so.
The gaslighting alone was just
right.
ugh.
Then you had the stuff that was said on the Zoom call with the affiliate owners who that was disturbing. Then you had the allegations from Andy Stump. Then you had everything else.
Mhm.
So this was a pattern of behavior, and people said, "You know what? I don't want to be associated with this. This is free market. I'm not going to invest my money in this. I don't want to provide money for this guy anymore." And look, no one forced Greg to sell. He didn't need to sell. But I think as someone who probably has some sort of business acumen, he looked at what was going on and said, if I don't get out now, my company's going to slowly bleed to death and my brand is going to be worth nothing.
And
because at the time it was toxic.
Yeah.
And I'd still argue maybe there is still a little bit of that stench on it, but now with him out of it, the slate can be wiped clean. And look, it was a business decision. I don't think this was cancel culture. I think this was a pattern of behavior that triggered a free market response, and people said, I don't want to be associated with that. And I think that Dave made that comparison as like, am I next? Well, are they going to come after me? And I think what he was trying to say is that, okay, the mob mentality worked here. And I wouldn't even, again, I don't think that's the right qualification.
I wouldn't even call it mob.
But I think the way he saw it is like, he said the cancel culture mentality worked here. So what if people come after me because they don't like the way something happened at the games? And I would say there is a big difference between saying some pretty abhorrent things and being accused of some terrible behavior, and whether you program thrusters at 115 or 165.
Yeah.
And I think if someone tried to do that in the community, they'd be laughed at. If they tried to, go after Dave and say, we need to back off, they would be laughed at.
It's already tried and failed. Look how many people, and I'll say I'm grateful for it, but look how many people spoke up and on behalf of us when we got fired.
Yeah.
The community was like, what the heck are you doing? Or the cuts in programming and stuff at the games, like, there's a difference between like details and things like that as pertaining to like the regulation of a sport versus a human being that's doing things that are more morally like despicable,
right?
And I've used that phrase before. That to me was. And as I unpack it more, it takes time. Didn't sit well with me, and it's just like I don't think you can equate the two. And now I'm grateful that Dave was open and shared with us in that regard. And I think that's another area of growth that he needs to have in that, because I think just equating those two, and I'm finding it difficult to kind of properly put that into words, but like, I don't think anyone immediately jumps to that association, I think it's interesting enough. And this kind of just popped in my head, actually spur of the moment, but you talk about that, like cancel culture and things like that. But like, look at what happened with Travis Williams specific. I'm using him as a specific example. He did something that I would not support or stand behind in any way. But the person who most negatively felt the effects of that directly, Chandler, understood that this was slightly out of character for him at times and was willing to give him a path towards redemption, and was open and discussed. And Travis made an effort, and I'm not saying he deserves to be in the clear now. He still has a tremendous amount of work to do, but Chandler left the door open. Now, Chandler is such a good human being. And I would understand if people didn't do that, would do what Chandler did. But they've been able to work on it, and they trained together this past weekend. You know, Chandler's going to take Travis's spot on the team, and there's been some unity, at least in working towards finding a better way forward. And when you it worries me a little bit that if Dave sees those associations like that, maybe he might be a little bit closed off to seeing some of the criticism and being able to be open to it. I don't know if that's wholly true, just because I think there are a lot of people behind the scenes at HQ that can provide that perspective to him that he trusts.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily make the community feel like their voice is being heard. And I think there's better ways, and this brings up another point. I think there are better ways to make sure that the community understands that their voice is being represented by certain people within HQ that will feed that to Dave as well to make sure that that stays open. But I mean, that's a poor solution right now. But it brings me to a point, like I said, that I think HQ has to be, and Dave, a next evolution has to be one that's much more above board and open with everything that's going on. And that transparency means that if you're doing something good for the community, there's value in you letting them know that that's happening.
Yeah.
It's not good enough just to do these things behind closed doors and then get upset when people criticize you for not doing enough. You know, a friend of mine, Joe, reached out, and he says, and I'm going to read some of his stuff. It seems like HQ has taken a defensive. This is paraphrasing. Has taken a stance like everybody's out to get them, so they don't provide any insight into the things that they're doing or why they're doing them. Even when it's something that's objectively great, like some of the programs Dave has worked on personally. But then in a moment like the interview you had with Dave over the weekend, he was upset that it seems like everybody was just piling on all the negative things that had gone on without highlighting any of the positive things. But as you said, most people have no clue of the things that he's done or the things that he's working with underprivileged communities or people of color, from kids from rough neighborhoods. I'm not saying that he has to get all kinds of attention and kudos for doing those, but it's a tough argument to make that nobody is paying attention to those things when you're consciously not allowing people to pay attention to those by keeping them behind closed doors. And I think that's been an issue with HQ in the past.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we've had to be spokespersons and kind of defend that at various levels, rather than HQ's quality communication do that. So there's a little bit of a rant there. But.
No, I think it actually kind of led me into, again, nice job, into something that I wanted to talk about. And that was just Dave's state of mind heading into that interview. And I don't want to try and justify anything he said. That's not what I'm trying to do, or, defend it. I'm just I'm trying to understand where it was coming from.
Yeah.
And you mentioned talking to him before and after. It was clear that he was getting bombarded on social media with all kinds of negativity, and he had yet to say anything, nothing. Now you can make the argument that maybe he brought that treatment on himself based on silence or what he hadn't
past
done,
behavior,
or past behavior, and that's totally fine. You can I can absolutely listen to that argument. But talking with us was the first opportunity that he had to sort of fire back at his critics. And I'm not saying that makes anything he said any better or any worse, but I just think we need to understand where he's coming from. And I hope that under different circumstances that he would have been a little more measured and a little more conciliatory with his remarks, because I think he would, and he told us some of the stuff that the messages that he had gotten, how he I can't respond. I want to respond. And I think maybe some of that seeped into some of his responses. And I want to make it clear, I am not trying to justify anything that he said or defend it or I'm just trying to understand where he was coming from. And I think that might add a little context too.
Yeah. Because I mean, as of right now, HQ isn't sold.
Right.
CrossFit isn't sold yet.
No, it's just, we're still negotiating.
But I also think that it's one of the things where, and this, I don't have this on our rundown, but the comment, I think a lot of people were closed off by the time they got to the back half of the interview that it, and understandably, but it doesn't mean that they didn't miss some really good and open and honest moments from Dave. I thought in the background. the comment about like people are no like, and there's error in this logic, but there's also some truth in this logic too. When he was talking about how he's like, people are getting super upset about these racial issues and things. And now, granted, that pertains to the Black community specifically. So I think he was a little bit errant in that. But nobody's talking about how there's a Mexican American CEO. Am I not brown enough for you? And I'm not saying his logic was correct, but you could see the emotion in there that was like, well, why does that not count for anything? Now, granted, and this is something I firmly believe as well, just because I'm Mexican or I'm brown or I'm a person of color doesn't mean that I cannot be racist as well. That doesn't exclude you from the racism thing.
Sure.
There's a phrase amongst, Mexicans, that a Mexican's worst enemy is another Mexican, and that pertains particularly to, immigration and the gap in generations and forgetting where they came from and things like that. But I still could empathize a little bit with the fact that lost in all of this was the fact that there was a Mexican American person at the head of this international company. How he got there is unfortunate, because of the circumstances. But it made me think that not once did I ever hear a speck of anything, and that deserved to be talked about.
I agree.
It absolutely deserved to be talked about. Now, it didn't exclude, like I said, from the other instances of race, and didn't mean that it didn't just automatically sanctify CrossFit from having any issues, because it doesn't turn a blind eye. And obviously there's plenty of issues and things that needs to work on from, inclusivity with the Black community. But that one just hit me hard in retrospect, and it kind of caught me off guard. I'll be honest, it put me on my heels a little bit during the interview, and it made it a little bit difficult for me to kind of come back from that. But it's also, I also think that maybe, and you have this written down, but Dave, I don't think is the best option for CEO going forward.
Yeah, I never thought he was, and that's not a personal shot at Dave. It could be look. I
think he's happy to not be going forward.
He should be. Look, I like Dave. I mean, I disagree with him on some things, especially some of the ways that he conducts himself in public. But look, he does a fantastic job with the games. I don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's a bigot. I don't think he's misogynistic. I don't think he's sexist. I don't think he's any of those things. He is a polarizing figure.
He is,
based on on the things that he's done in the past and the way that he acts. And some people love that, and some people not so much. But that is exactly why, especially in this climate, he probably wasn't going to be the long-term solution. My hope is that he would say, okay, I need to get this thing back on track, and then I need to hand it over to somebody who's much better suited for this job than I am. Because when you're a CEO of this company in this climate, you're not going to make everybody happy. I get that, but you can't actively piss them off. And I think Dave has a propensity to do that based on some of the things that he says and the way he conducts himself.
Yeah. And this is just a different state of mind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hell, I'd say the same thing about me. I'm not, if they put me in charge, I'd be like, I got to get someone here to do this job right now, because this is not what I'm built for.
Yeah.
So I think that, he is perfect with the games. And it sounds like, when you go into the back half of that interview, all the great things that were said about the future of the sport and where that's going, that he's going to have a lot of opportunities to get this thing back to where it was in 2018. And he deserves a lot of credit for getting it there in the first place. And I think he is exactly in the right role there. And look, I think he can be part of the solution. I really do. I mean, it's evidenced by the scholarship program that just came out. He was working on that. Some of the things he said to us that he wants to do.
He mentioned Nicole, working to get Nicole back.
Yeah, when she's coming back. So there's I think he needs to be part of the solution, but I just don't think that's the right role for him.
Yeah, I think some people are unfairly just writing him off. Now, granted, if it comes out that there's some portion of this Greg stuff that's going on, then I totally get, he needs to be part of it, of that clean slate. But my understanding is that that's not the case. I may be wrong.
And again, I asked him straight up. I said, did you ever see anything, looking back on it now, that you said, man, I wish I would have said something? And he said, maybe once or twice, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I can think of, the more I thought about it, I thought of one. And then to say for myself too, the only time that anybody ever came to me with behavior that they deemed was inappropriate, I said something about it. And it was handled to what I understand, after talking to the people who were involved, to their satisfaction.
And I'm sure
So-
there's some people that heard Dave say that and be like, I could probably think of a few, you know,
Sure.
and that's totally fair too.
Mhm.
But yeah, man, I mean, I'll be honest. I spent all week, like the rest of the weekend, basically like trying to read comments um, and catch up and talk with people. So
Mhm.
I want anyone listening to this to understand this. Like this is an open discussion, and this is an open discourse and dialogue that we're having about this. Like I read every comment that happens on our social media for the most part. And we deserve to be held accountable too. And I appreciate the people holding us accountable in many of those ways.
I was kicking myself afterwards. I listened to it. I was like, oh man, I should have. It's like that when you think of the best comeback 5 minutes after you had the opportunity to do it, and it doesn't matter anymore. Yeah, there was things that I absolutely could have done better. I wish I would have pushed back harder on the culture thing. I wish I would have, maybe gone a little more into the, what did you know and when did you know it thing. But I asked him the one question and he said, that's it, and then I left it. Now, but overall, I thought, if you get past that first part, which I think everyone has had the problem with, and you get into the back half of it, there's a lot to be excited about there.
Yeah.
And that's what I was hoping people would focus on. But again, you're right. Like there are times where, I'm never going to be perfect when I interview people. And every time I listen back, I'm like, oh, I should have gone, maybe I should have gone there. I should have gotten that answer. But I think for the most part, I was happy with the way the conversation played out, but definitely some things that, I could have done better for sure.
I'm definitely happy with how it played out in the back end with him talking about some of those things. This is, just a moment of honesty. The thing that, in talking with people, that really still kind of sits with me is the feeling of dismissal of the valid criticisms as noise and negativity. And I think if we were able to talk to Dave more, he might be able to elaborate on that more. I don't want to speak for him. He could just view it as noise and negativity. I don't think that based on the conversations we had before and after, but people don't get to hear that. So that was where we dropped the ball.
Yeah.
But understandably so, a lot of people felt like he was just dismissing these criticisms, part of which helped put us in this position right here.
Right.
And that is still very much sitting with me, and it doesn't sit right with me. And it's something that we'll talk with Dave about in the future and things like that. But it is troubling that some people have just written everything off, and I understand that. Doesn't mean their thoughts and feelings aren't valid and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm just like, I'm hoping that in the very least, sure, people can feel completely disenfranchised or devalued by HQ right now, or completely think that the ship's continuing to go down. But at least I hope that they can at least exercise a little bit of patience to wait and see what Eric's going to do. And wait and see what Eric and Dave and Nicole and all those other people are going to do. And I hope that they remain open to the possibility that things can get better.
Yeah. And I think, for me too, it's like, and I apologize for the noise going on. There's a construction truck out front of my house. That at some point, hopefully, Greg is going to be history. He's going to be out of the picture. He's gone. All right. And we're going to have to look at what we have. And I think there's a lot of positive going on right now. You look at what Eric has said, the things Dave has done behind the scenes. Maybe he's not saying the right things, but he's doing the right things. Nicole Carroll coming back. And we're going to have to look at the group and be like, you know what? This is a pretty damn good group. No one's perfect. We're not going to get to that. But like Vince Lombardi used to say, in the pursuit of perfection, we can achieve greatness. And I think that we're going to get to greatness with this group. There's a lot of good stuff going on over there. And you're not probably going to agree with 100% of it. That's any business, whoever you patronize, whatever business you go to, you probably don't agree 100% all the time with everything they do. But the vast majority of it is going to be good. And at some point we have to just come together as a family and be like, hey, let's move forward, because the bad stuff is gone. That guy's history. This is a whole new era now. And I think that, again, if you get to the back half of that, especially from a fan of the sports perspective, there's a lot to be fired up about, man. This thing's going to go, get big again, hopefully pretty quickly. And it's going to be something that I think everybody can enjoy.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And there are some people that won't be able to get over it. And that's totally totally their prerogative, and I totally get it. And, and there are a lot of people that are disappointed in Dave from that interview, and I totally get it. And, but I just hope that they're moving forward. There is an openness and availability for a path to for redemption and you know, be open for things to improve. There's a comment that I found particularly
Can I add one thing to that before we shift gears?
Sure.
You and I have been, asked a lot about, would we go back? Because they've talked about media, and I don't want to get into that here, but everyone I've talked to is a former employee. When they say I would go back, they'd say if X, Y, and Z are gone, and Dave Castro's name is never on that list. So that should tell you something.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. There were two comments I wanted to talk about in response to this. People talking about the negativity. Someone brought up Sevon's podcast, and I will say, and this is something I've wanted to say, that one of the things that I feel a little bit of regret about is, so full disclosure, I didn't really listen to the podcast ever. It's not my cup of tea. His interview style is not my cup of tea. There's a couple times I went on that
Same
show
here.
just to troll the leaderboard for like game specific, looking at the leaderboard, stuff like that. But people have brought some things to my attention that were said and what went down in those interviews. That honestly is embarrassing to me. Like some discussion and things like that. And I'm like, man, that did take place in our office, and
It did.
I wish I could have. It was not okay for me to turn a blind eye to that. And I don't really like stand behind that content or that style either. But yeah, some people have asked about it, and it hasn't been talked about much, and it deserves to. There are some things that I don't think in any way, shape, or form going forward is ever going to exist in CrossFit going forward.
Well, the one thing that I saw, just to add on to that, I thought about one time I was on that, and he made a comment, and I just went, oh man. And I just shook my head and just kept going. Now, hindsight, probably I should have said something like, hey man, that's not cool.
Yeah.
But I just kept going. And that was the one time that I could think of when I was in a position where I should have said something and I didn't. And I regret that now.
Yeah. There was a comment. I can't find it now, and I'm not sure where. I think it was on the Black at CrossFit Instagram handle, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But the whole like wait and see like response, like, oh, just wait and see, just wait and see. And he mentioned about how historically that has been something that has been levied against the Black community for quite some time with very, very slow and less than fruitful results.
Sure.
And I respect that. And so I'm curious, and I want people to actually interact with and respond to this in the comments, because I'm kind of curious, I don't understand. I don't understand where the line is there between when is wait and see, like just wait and see because we've got some stuff that we can't talk about. Like, where's that line and where's that trust, and how does that get rebuilt to where when people say like just wait and see, it's from the community standpoint, CrossFit and stuff like that, that becomes an okay thing, with the understanding, and I get that it's going to take some actual action and some time to earn that trust back. But that hit me in particular. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm sure you've been told wait and see a ton, and that has never materialized. And I hope that's not the case going forward. But that was just something that kind of reframed things for a little bit for me. But and I think it applies here, because Dave was kind of saying like wait and see a little bit, but in the past that has ultimately led us to here. Right. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think too, that the reason I would say it might carry a little more weight this time is because there's a new owner coming in. There's changes are being made. Nicole Carroll is coming back. The scholarship program, they just announced that. Who knows how much bigger that's going to get. So it's not like,
my understanding is it's supposed to get really big, and international.
So I feel like as far as CrossFit is concerned, once Eric officially takes over, now we're at a new starting line.
Yeah.
And I think him saying, just wait and see, probably carries a lot more weight than Greg Glassman coming on and say, we'll just wait and see.
Yeah. And that it also means when you get to that starting line, you're supposed to forget everything that's happened before. You should still,
I agree. Yeah.
rightfully skeptical and things like that. But
people need to be held accountable 100%.